Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to look at permissifying this minimal tweet bank. And so we're going to start out with an Express application. We could look over here. We could see that we have our home page. We could drill down to a user's tweets, in which case we see this information here. And I could tweet again. And it'll end up just taking me back to this page where it's using my username here. No deleting functionality or anything like that. So let's get started building this. And we'll build it from the perspective of building an Express app. So let's look at this, what I have here, which is probably going to be nothing. So I'm always going to do a get init. And let's go over here, and I'm going to do an npm init, so I could bring in some modules here. This just uses the default settings. And I'll go over here, and I'm going to say npm install. What do I need right off the bat? Let me start off with just Express. What I'm going to worry less about when I do this, I'm going to worry less about inserting data at the beginning. I want to focus on having some data in my database that I can end up working with. So, and I'm going to try to do this without actually, with the exception of creating the database, without actually having to go in and do anything in my console. So I'm going to say npm install Express. I'm going to save this. And let me open up my editor of choice. So what I've got here is my package JSON file. And what I'm going to do here is in my development environment, because again, my development environment is going to be different than my production environment. In my development environment, I'm going to specify my database URL, which is going to be a local database. And this is going to be Postgres, localhost. And let me try to pick something that doesn't exist yet. I'm going to say Twitter SQL with promises. Not a great name for a database, but it'll have to do. And now I'm going to say nodemon server.js. Okay? So I'm going to run this. It's going to blow up because I don't have my server.js file. But again, if you ever want to know what commands you can run, if you do npm run, this will tell you what you can run. And I'm going to say npm run start dev. Okay? Can't find my server file. I'm going to go back here. And I'm going to add this in. So let's start building this out a little bit. We'll set up a couple of routes for it. I'm going to bring in Express. And I'm going to go over here. Not only am I going to end up bringing in Express, I'm going to create my Express app. And I'll go over here and I'm going to specify that I've got a port. Again, when this gets deployed, there's going to be a port that's going to be set for me. So what I'm going to, and the way that it's done is through an environment variable. And I'll specify that my port is going to be process environment.port, otherwise 3000. I'm going to specify that my Express server is going to listen on this port. And I'm going to use my ES6 syntax, listening on port, $port. So once I end up doing that, this should end up running. I see that I have an address in use. Let's just see if I could find that. I've got something else running over here. Let me restart that, and this should end up running. Okay? So now if I open up the browser, and I'll keep this open, it'll sort of help us build this out. If I go over to localhost 3000, it'll say that I can't make a GET request. So let's go and fix that. We're going to specify app.get / and I'll go over here and I'll just say response.send hello world. Again, one thing that I was talking to Jordan about before, and together he helped me out. We actually did a review video for one of the weekend workshops, which I'll post to you. It's the idea of writing the most minimal amount of code possible before you go back here and do that, okay? As little as you have to do. So we know we're going to have this route. We also want to set up a template engine because we're going to be passing data back and forth. We don't want to have to, write out all of our, we don't want to do this without a templating engine, which would be a bit of a disaster. So we're going to say response.render, and we'll go over here and we'll specify that we're going to end up rendering our index view. When we do that, we'll get a message that we don't have a view engine, and let's go in and let's use npm install swig, save, and we'll go over here and we'll bring in swig equals require swig, and we'll have a couple of lines here. Swig set defaults. I don't want it to cache this, which will be a very frustrating development experience because I'll be making changes to my template files and I won't see those changes. And what I also want to do with my app is I want to set my view engine so that when it looks for a file, it's going to look for an HTML extension. But when I do this, it also is going to look for what is called an HTML engine to do the processing for my template. So if I just did this, it's going to say it can't find this module. And here I'm going to say app.engine HTML swig render file. Once I do that, I'll get a different error message. It's going to say that I can't find this index view. So let's go over here, add our views, have index.html. And let's go over here and put in some HTML. I'm going to keep this really simple and really ugly. Well, I'm not, it's a good question. I'm not doing a layout because I want to do this with, I really want to try to do this with one file. If I had multiple files and I was going to reuse stuff, then I would do a layout. I mean, more often than not, I'm going to end up doing a layout. I'm going to want to reuse some stuff. But here, just sort of keeping it as simple as we can. I'm going to put an href here of slash. So now if I do that, I'm going to get this, and it's just going to constantly reload this page, which doesn't look all that great. It's ugly. It's okay. Live with it. Ugly's okay. All right, one line at a time. So let's go and figure out what we might want to do here. So here's our server. Now, what I really would like to do when I go to render this page is that I would like to have some sort of DB file. And what I would like to be able to do here is when I end up calling this DB file, I would do something along the lines of DB get tweets. Okay, and I want a permissified version of this. Then, now I've got my tweets. And if I end up going down here, what I want to do is I want to specify. So again, even though this is not test-driven development, this is a very optimistic thing that doesn't exist yet. But when I render this, I want to be able to pass in my tweets. Okay? Again, ES6 allows me to just do that because this is the name of my variable that's coming in here. Again, this is going to be, I'm assuming, if you looked at this code, one thing you could probably assume is that this db.getTweets is going to be a promise. If you're playing along like a detective. Now, again, this is going to bomb out. Let's just make sure it bombs out for the right reasons. Right, it can't find DB, so let's go in and set up DB. And so here we'll do a module.exports, and we'll go over here. And I'll go over here and I'll say, hey, look, I'm going to have this constant get tweets. Again, the big difference here is that it's not taking a callback. Okay? And I'm going to export get tweets. Okay? So a big indication that you don't have a promise here is that if I do this, okay, it's not going to bomb out here. But when I go over here and I run this, it's going to say, hey, look, you don't have a promise. Okay? So let's actually go and create a promise. Believe it or not, there's actually a promise now built into ES6. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to return from here a new promise. Resolve, reject. Resolve and reject are what? Functions. Okay? And if I just did this, my then is going to be okay. This is going to end up building. But when I go over here, I'm going to be sitting around for a long time. Okay? Because I haven't resolved it, but let's resolve it. And we'll resolve it just for the sake of argument. Now it ends up resolving, and just for the sake of it, if I went over here and I go over to my views, I'm going to create an unordered list. And I'll go over here and I'll say, for tweet in tweets, this is being passed in. And for the moment, I'll just put an li. Right now, these are just going to be strings.
As an aside, when you go back to that promise, the reason that promise looks the way it does is because you weren't handling the error. You're just assuming that you're not going to get an error.
Oh, yeah. I'm assuming I'm not going to get an error. I can test this out.
That was all the question. I made it a statement, but it was a question.
Yeah. I mean, look, this is what this is what this is going to do. This code is going to indicate what I'm doing is I'm passing back a promise that I'm resolving, right? So if I do this, I'll see foo and bar. Now, this is not really what I want to do. What I really want to do here is I want to connect to a database. And in fact, what I really want to do is I want to not only connect to a database, but also when my application runs, I also want to seed my database as well, and I want to sync my database as well. These are all important parts of working with a database. So let's take a step back for a sec, and we'll look at our server. And what I'm going to do here is after this app ends up loading, I'm going to specify, hey, look, db.sync. Okay? And I'll do a then. And again, this doesn't exist yet. And I'll go over here and I'll say console.log and I should say your database is. So if I end up doing this, I'll find out that sync is not an option. Well, let's think about the various parts of syncing and how we're going to go and permissify our code. We know a couple things here. If I go to my DB over here, one of the things that I could end up doing here is bringing in, and I'm going to have to install this actually, bringing in Postgres. And let's do that. So before I can do any kind of syncing. I mean, obviously, I want to have some sync function here. And again, this is something that I want to, whoever has my module, I want them to have access to it. But one thing that I probably want to do here is, before I end up syncing, is I would like to make sure that I could connect with my database, right? So I want to be able to connect and do it then and do some other stuff here. All right. Now again, if sync is going to be a problem, so one of the problems that I'm going to have here, if I went to run this, connect is not defined. So let's start off with connecting. We want to be able to connect to our database. And we want to make sure I want to make sure that I have a connection and I am connected. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to call connect. And let's just think about what this is going to look like. Now this does not exist yet, but one of the things we can do is I'm going to call this client promise. Notice that connect has a then, so connect has to return a promise. And I'm going to say, hey, look, if client promise exists, return it. You're done. Okay? You already have a client promise. You're done. Otherwise, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set client promise. And what is client promise going to look like? It's a new promise. Resolve, reject. And in fact, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to specify return client promise. So the first time that this goes through, there is not a promise, okay? And what I end up doing is I end up returning this same promise. Now again, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to wrap around what were callback methods and solve this with a promise. So what is this going to look like? Well, when I end up doing my client promise, what I'm going to do is do a const. And here's where I'm actually going to say client equals new Postgres client process environment database URL. And now if I have my client, what I'm doing is I'm basically wrapping around something that has a callback, the same thing that you did with the read file. And I say client, I want to connect. When I connect, the only thing that I'm going to get back is whether or not I have an error. If I have an error, real simple business here. I'm going to get out of there, but I'm also going to reject with the error. If I'm successful, I'm going to resolve with the client. Okay? So what this should allow me to do here is that when I call sync, this is a critical thing here. By the way, notice that sync is expecting to get a promise back. If I look at how sync is being used here, db sync then. So when I call db sync, I need to get a promise back, and something I forget to do sometimes is to make sure, here I know that I'm returning a promise, right? If the promise exists, return it. If not, create it, and then return it, and then the next time through you'll have this promise. So I need to make sure that I do a return here. And once I end up doing that, let's just see. We go down here. Well, this is interesting. So I'm not seeing anything, right? How come? I'm not seeing this message, but I don't see any errors either. Catch, error. Thank you. And here, I'll go And I'll say console.log error. What do you think the error is? Right. So now I could handle my error. Twitter SQL with promises doesn't exist. Let me go over here. Create database. Now I've got a database. Again, NodeMon's not aware of that error. Your database is synced. Now we know our database really isn't synced, right? If I go over here and I look at my connection to Twitter SQL with promises, and I go to do a D, it'll tell me that I have nothing in there, okay? So what do I really want to do when I sync? Well, when I go back here, what I want to do is I really want to go and create some tables, right? So I'm going to end up connecting. Well, how's that going to end up working? Well, what I could do here is that I could go over here and I could say const SQL equals, what is our SQL going to look like? Well, we'll go over here and we'll say we're going to drop if exists table users. No, actually, tweets. And I'm going to do the same thing with my users table. And I'll go over here and I'll say create table users. And now I'm going to describe it. It's got a ID, serial, primary key. Users also have a name, text. I'm going to copy this. These are going to be my tweets. And here, my tweets are going to have content, that's some text. If I just wanted to sort of test this out without putting the foreign key in here, I could do that. What do I want to do here? Well, again, I want to have another promise. So what I can do here is I could return a new promise, resolve, reject. What is this promise going to look like? Well, what I'm going to do is I have my connect here. My connect gives me back my connected client, right? That's what connect does. And I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to say client.query, and this is going to be my SQL. This is either going to give me an error back, and I really only care about the error, because again, it's not like I'm getting back an ID or other data. So what I could end up doing here is that when this gets called, very simply, if error, return, reject with the error. Otherwise, resolve, and there's really nothing to resolve to. I just want to say that I'm done creating my tables. So now if I go back here, let's see what we've got. So syntax error near if, and let's just see what my syntax is. Drop table if exists, so not uncommon. Drop table if exists, okay. And here, drop table if exists. My database is synced, is it? Let's go to my Postgres and do a describe. And there are my tables, okay? Let's go in here and do a couple of other things here. We're going to have content. We're going to have a user ID, which is an integer. And it references user's ID. Did it work? Well, real simple to see. Looks like it worked. Okay? So once I have that, let's just think about another couple of things we could do here. Let's say that we wanted to start out with some data. Okay? So what we could end up doing here is that when we end up going to our server, we could sync. Your database is synced. That's great. But let's do it then. And let's do a return, and we'll say db seed. What is db seed going to do? Well, right now, it doesn't do anything. And this breaks because db seed doesn't work. So let's set up our db seed. Again, not a lot of code here. If we end up having seed, so what is seed going to look like? Well, again, we want to get access to our client. So when we end up seeding, I'm going to copy this. So again, we're going to end up connecting here. And what do we want to do when we seed? Well, let's say that we want to do something like, let's create a couple of users that we could take a look at. So we'll say return create user. And in fact, let's go over here. And we'll also create Alex as a user as well. Now again, this doesn't exist. Seed is not a function, but that's for a different reason. I always have to remember that if I want to expose something, I've got to do that. And now I'll get create user is not defined. So if we go up here to const create user, this is going to get passed in a name. And how are we going to go and create a user? Well, again, we need to have our client. So we're going to connect. We get it then. We've got our client. And what do I want to do here? Well, again, what I'm going to do here is return a new promise, resolve, reject. And again, I'm going to wrap around this client. So what's my query going to be? Client.query, insert into users, name, values, $1. And this takes some parameters. The name goes here. This is going to be a callback, which, let's just say for the moment, I'm concerned about getting an error. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to specify that what I'm going to end up doing here is that if you have an error, reject with the error. Otherwise, resolve. And again, right now, I'm not terribly concerned what that value is. So going over here, your database is synced. Is it? Select star from users. Looking pretty good. Okay. Now, one thing you're going to notice here is that there's a lot of this client query and callback. But wouldn't it be great if we could actually just wrap around the query by doing something like this? What is a query going to take? Some SQL and some params, right? So when I end up querying, I'm going to connect because I need my client. And now what this is going to give me the ability to do is that when I end up doing that, I'm going to return new promise, resolve, reject, and what I'll do here is I'll have my client query the SQL and the params. And just to be safe, if there are no params, I'll say params equals params or an empty array. And I'll go over here, and now I'm going to have my callback. And this is going to be either an error or a result, which I sometimes might want to use. And I'll go over here and I'll say, hey, look, if in fact you have an error, get out of there, reject it with the error. If you don't, then I'm going to resolve it, and queries will always return rows. I'll say result, not rows, even if I'm not going to end up using it. Okay? So what this is going to allow me to do, when I end up calling create user, instead of having all this in here, what I can do when I call create user is return query, insert into users, name, values, $1, name, and that's my promise, right? So again, if this doesn't break, your database is synced, right? Let's see if that's the case. Looks pretty good. Let's make sure it's the case. Let's insert one more user. So now, if I do this, I'll see that I've got my 3 users. Now, let's just clean this up a little bit. Now, by the way, if you have stuff working at some point in your application, get.status, commit it, okay? Then you can always go in and change it, but let's figure this stuff out, because right now, when I call sync, this is going to be a little bit easier. All I need to do is take my SQL, so my sync becomes a lot easier, because now with my sync, I could just return query SQL. I've got no parameters. Let's make sure that that works. Seems to work. Okay? And let's just see if there's anything else here that we need to fix. So we've got our connect. Here's our query, which is where most of our work is going to be. So when we call create user, we end up doing that again. If that promise was resolved with the connection, we've got a resolved promise. So let's actually do something a little bit different, right? Again, without necessarily going in and reloading the browser, let's go in here. And when we go to sync or seed, instead of creating a user, let's create a tweet. So I'm going to tweet, hi. Alex is going to say hello. Chris is going to say bye. And let's change this to tweet.
And you're doing it so that now you're going to have it so that tweet also looks and sees it, because you're going to receive this thing. If there's a user.
Right, I haven't done that yet. That's the logic that I'm going to. That's where I'm going. Okay? So if I end up doing this, of course, this breaks. Create tweet is not defined, okay? By the way, just one thing that you see here. Notice how flatter this is, right? There still is the one callback with the then, but other than that, these chains are flattened quite a bit, okay? So what are we going to do when we create a tweet? Let's go over here and say create tweet. This is going to take a name and some content. And let's go down over here and make sure we export it. So now once we end up doing that, and we're going to create a tweet. Well, so let's think about what we're going to do here. We're going to return, because again, we always want to return a promise, and we're going to do a query. What's our query going to look like? Select ID from users where name equals $1. $1 is going to be your name, which is going to be name. This is a then, okay? And this gives us back, again, this is a query. This gives us back a number of rows. So we'll go over here and I'll say users. Well, if in fact, if users dot length, right, meaning I found the user, then I'm really ready to move on because now I have that user ID. So I go over here and I say return user0.id. Okay? Otherwise, what do I want to do? Create the user. Return query, insert into users. Well, can I just do this? I already have my create user. Return create user. And I'm going to end up passing in create user, and I'm going to pass in the name. I do, yeah. So over here, when I do create a user, I'm going to say returning ID. So in either case, if I end up making it down here, if I'm successful, either I found the user here, and I've got their ID. Otherwise, let's actually make it a little bit more readable. If I have users.length, I'm going to return users. Otherwise, I'm going to end up calling create users. And again, this gives me users. I'm really only interested, I should have a user at this point, or user ID, I should say. So if I go over here, I could specify ID users0.id, right? Either I have the ID from here, or I'll get the ID from here. Okay? Again, returning gives you a rows collection. My query is pretty generic. It returns result.rows. And if I have that, and it works, what I should be able to do here is do query, insert into tweets, user ID, content, values, 1, values not brackets, 2, and here we're going to have our user ID. Doesn't like ID here. Let me just call this user ID. And we'll go over here and we'll put in, this is going to be user ID, and this is going to be content. So if this is done correctly, let's take a look. Database is synced. Select star from tweets. Hi, bye, hello. 3 users, that's fine, but let's just really test out if it's working. Let me give myself another tweet, right? I always have a lot to say. So I'll go over here. And here I'll say, hi again. And if that ran, I should see that I'm represented there twice. Now, once I have that, what this gives me the ability to do is that when I go to get my tweets, I don't need to do this. I just say connect. What do I want to connect with? Well, I'm going to set this up. I'm going to say const SQL, because this is going to be a join. It's going to be on a couple lines. I'll say select users.name, and I'll say tweets.id, tweets.userid, tweets.content from tweets, join users on users ID equals tweets.user ID. Now I could connect, pass in that SQL, and in fact, just return that. That's going to make that connection. And let's just see what that does. Again, assuming nothing breaks. Now if I go back here, object has own property is not a function. Let's just see where that is. Let's see one thing here. So I'm calling connect with this SQL, and let's take a look. And it's possible that we have an error here. And let's just see if we do. But let's try to figure out why we're not catching it if we do. So let's put a catch here. And we'll go over here and we'll say error. And let's see if this buys us anything. I'm going to say next with the error.
Did you need a semicolon at the end of the last SQL statement you defined?
Maybe. Let me see. Let's just see what this buys me. I think I'm going to get this same error. So let's take a look over here. Object has own property. Let's see what I'm looking at here. Am I making it down to here?
What was it telling you the line?
You know, it was not clear to me because I'm not seeing it in my code here. I think to me it feels like a swig error, which leads me to believe that tweets might not be what I think it is. Let's see if I can make that error go away. I'm going to go to my index page and I'm going to take this out. So it's something that's in there, and let's see what it thinks that tweets are. Object has own property, so I'm not passing back something that I think I'm passing. Let's take a look. Obviously, I'm making it to here. And let's just see if I could see anything. I probably have a SQL error. That's my guess. Oh. This looks like I'm passing back my connection, which doesn't look right, which means that something over here is wrong. I think I called the wrong function.
It's called SQL?
I think, yeah.
Maybe it's not query SQL, it's query SQL.
No. Here's the error. I don't want to connect here. I want to query. And there I am. There are my tweets. And if I go over here, I could go over here and I could say for tweet in tweets, end for. And for this, I'm just going to show the tweet.content, the tweet.id, dot name, and just to see that I'm not creating more than one user, I'll say tweet dot user ID. If I do that, I'll see this. Let me put this in a list item. Okay, and let's just do one other thing here. Let's also just make sure that we have a post route so that we can end up creating a tweet. And the way that we'll end up doing that is on this page, we'll do a form. Method is going to be post. Action, we don't need because it's going to go back to this page. And we'll go over here, form, I'll put a div here, label, user, and I'll go over here, I'll put a input, name equals name, and we'll go over here and we'll say content, and we'll go over here and we'll say button, type is submit, save. Now, if we end up doing that, if I go and I save this, I'll see that I can't post to this. But there's one thing that I'm going to need here. I'm going to need to get my body parser in here. I know that from experience. So let me go over here, npm install body parser. This, again, when you see these commands, I'm hoping that when you see them, you've done this already 30, 40, 50 times. The more you do it, the more comfortable you're going to get with it. And I'm going to go over here and I'll say, and in fact, I'm going to do this in one shot, app.use require body parser. And this is going to be the URL encoded version of body parser. And we say extended because it wants you to. It'll bark at you if you don't. And this just basically is that if we ended up having more complex forms, nested objects, extended might come into play. It's not going to come into play here. Just to see that we have this working, let's do an app.post / request response next. And I'm going to go over here and just for the sake of argument, I'll say response.send request.body. So let's go back over here. So I could see that it's got my name, it's got my content. So what does this give me the ability to do? Well, luckily, I've got this DB, create tweet, request.body.name, request.body.content. Beauty of this, then, I don't really care what the result is here, because all I want to do here is go over and do a response.redirect over to /. And now, if I say prof, one more, I'll see that it used my ID. I could say Chris, hi again. But if I say Chris with a C, I'll see that I have a new user. Okay? So again, what I wanted to do there is to sort of get you comfortable with using promises. And again, there's some refactoring. That's one of the things that you'll find is that, you know, here, whether or not you would end up seeing it the first time, right? The idea is that, you know, I'm reusing this query multiple times. I think I'm missing some semicolons here. And in fact, I bet you, no, connect. I am using it. I don't know why it's barking at me there. Okay. But you could see that, yeah, there's a bit of code. It's about 100 lines to do this. We'll find out when we end up using SQLize. It'll probably take about 10. A lot less to do. We're not going to have to write our own SQL. But again, the whole thing here is that this ends up getting really flattened out quite a bit. So, I mean, if you wanted to write some tests for it, I mean, in essence, you could end up syncing and seeding your database. For the sake of completion, let's just do that really fast. I'm going to go back to my package JSON, and for my test.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Just to go back to that checkpoint. The checkpoint was looking for, in the test itself, because it wanted you to create a site like what you just did.
Mm-hmm.
It was looking for a instead of like a
template, render, right?
Instead of a text response, okay? It was looking for a JSON response.
Understood. Well, I'll talk about it a little bit. I'll talk a little bit about the workshop. But let's just for the moment here, let's just pretend that we have another database, because we have our testing database. And I'm going to go over here and I'll say test. And this is going to be /node modules mocha bin mocha. And if I go over here and I say npm run test, right, it's not going to like that very much because it's not going to find mocha. So let's do an npm install of mocha chai. We're going to save it. And if I go back over here and I run this command again, now it'll tell me that it won't find any test files. And in fact, let me do one more thing here because I wanted to keep on running my tests. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to specify, not only do I not want it to run mocha, but I'm going to use nodemon. So every time that I have a change to my files, it'll sit there. Let me try that again. And it's going to sit here and say I can't find any test files. Well, let's do a quick test file. We'll say test. And I'll go over here and I'll say model.test.js. Right, this is where someone says after the fact, create a test. I'll bring in my expect library, require chai expect. I'm going to describe tweeting. And I'll specify that before each and I'll write an expectation. I'm going to put in let tweets here. I think we end up syncing this with 4 tweets, I think. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to specify that expect tweets dot length to equal 4. If I just did that, this test is going to break. I actually forgot a equal sign here. Expect is not a function. Expect, require, not calling expect, but just expect. It says you have 0. So what are we going to do before each? I'll say constant db equals require. I got to go up 1 level. /db. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say db dot seed. And then I'm going to say return db get tweets. And just so I don't step on myself here, I'm going to call this tweets. So now I could say tweets equals tweets. I could end up calling done. Let's see. Tweeting, so I'm getting stuck here. Now the reason I'm getting stuck here is because I'm not handling any errors. So it's never a bad idea if you do this to do a catch and call done here with your error. And I'll probably see that my database doesn't exist. Twitter SQL promises test doesn't exist. And I'll go over here. And let's go back and rerun the test. Again, NodeMon's not going to realize that that's what the issue. This is my other screen here. I'm going to kill this. Relation users does not exist. So let's try to figure out. So what's happening here is that when I go to seed, I really need to sync before I go to seed, which kind of makes sense.
The database, why do you got the error of the database not existing?
No, because I created, with my testing, I actually am looking for another database. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to sync. And I'm going to go over here, and once I end up syncing, I'm going to end up seeding. Move this over. Let me move it over again. All right, so everyone can see, first I end up syncing, I have my tables, then I seed, then I end up getting my tweets, and I do have 4 tweets. So again, it's pretty testable, which is nice. A little bit more work here going on. You'll see in some of the workshops when you're connecting to the database, you might not end up going through this process, but this actually gives me the ability to make sure that I have a connection when I think I have a connection. There's not going to be any timing issues. And probably the only thing left to do here would be maybe to have a page with the, that links to the individual user's tweets, but I'll leave that as an exercise. All right, let me stop this recording.